And after the days of the Ferry Command, I was stationed at March. And we had the B-36s there. I went to real early B-36 school. That had the, didn't have the truck gears yet on it, didn't have the jet pods and so on. And we were operating out of March. And we'd fly up, we were nuclear, we'd fly the perimeter in 33 hours. And then we had, that was about the time. And then we had 2 weeks off because they were trying to cut back. They didn't have money, you know, the military, they had it or they didn't. But the B-36 was a fantastic airplane. The only problem we had with the B-36, well, first of all, it was a fun airplane. We had a pressurized section up in front and a pressurized section. If I remember, I think it was about 85 feet tunnel down through there. And you rode a little car back and forth. And if you knew that, somebody was doing it, you could do that. The early ones didn't have brakes on the car, so we had our fun there. But the biggest problem was we'd go out in August, out of March, we'd go out in the evening usually, and boy, I tell you, it was hot as hell. And boy, all of those old parts, we had them firewalled. And we had a Sperry analyzer in there to look at the engines. And everything was fine, but then when we started to throttle it back and we got up cold, the engines started to miss like hell. We had the reach and the spark plugs, they worked good down here, but they overheated. And then, of course, when they cooled down over, they'd foul, and Christ, it was a nightmare. Now, I remember my cousin, Ken Bird, with Pratt & Whitney, of course, I had the in there, and I think Champion and 2 or 3 others tried to build the right reach. You couldn't do it. You couldn't do that at all. Well, about that time, of course, they put the truck gear on, and the 4 jet engine, I think they were J47s, if I remember right. But anyway, they were run on gasoline, the first ones, and we only, I think, 50 hours on light, but we just used them on takeoff. But we wouldn't we wouldn't come up with a lot of power on a hot day. And that ended it. And they found a good right reach on the spark plug we didn't have anymore. That was an amazing airplane. You know, that thing really went like hell. The airspeed was nothing, but you were way up there. That was the first airplane. I don't think I ever got over 34,000 feet. I talked to a fellow the other day, said he got up to 36,000 feet. He was also on B-26. But that was a good deal for me because I had, as I say, and we had 2 weeks off. And that's in Palm Springs. I had located there and we built a home there because it was convenient to march. And then I started my respirator and designs and so on. I put in a machine shop there and so on.
And, what year was it that you flew that German plane where you got that?
Oh boy, that had to be probably 43, probably. Had to be 43, yeah.
It was during the war?
Oh yeah, oh yes, right in the middle of the war, yeah.
So a lot of times they would find German planes and you would bring them?
Not many, no. You know, I don't know how, and I don't know how it ever got there, the earring cassette. I never knew the history of it, and I don't know what ever happened to it. I think there is one back at the museum, but I don't think it's that era. Well, who knows? I just don't know. I wouldn't even recognize it. Yeah, I wouldn't even recognize it. But anyhow, yeah, the 109s, they had a few 109s. But what would happen is the 109s, of course, they'd land in hayfields and so on. The English had a bunch of those, and I know we had them early. I couldn't get into the 109. It was just too damn tight. I mean, if I did, I never flew it. And I never flew a Zero either. We had those airplanes, and I had the opportunity, but I was just too damn. So they say the P-39 I used to have too. Now, the P-63 was a fantastic airplane, and I liked it actually at low altitudes better than the P-51. But of course, you got upstairs, the P-51 would run circles around it. I flew every P-51. I started in the A-36, which was the Allison, right on up to a H, if I remember right. And then the P-82 was the twin Mustang. So I had fun.
Now, when I was a kid, I used to watch a lot of old movies. And you'd see an old movie, like with Jimmy Stewart one time, where the person had to go into these big, giant machines. Mm-hmm. And what were those machines? Can you sort of explain?
Well, you're talking about the film that was made by the Navy in San Diego. I don't know what your big old machine. Describe it a little bit.
It's those lung machines. It's like the.
That was a movie, you know, and that wasn't. They were thinking of the iron lungs, you know, the body respirators, and they were trying to put you in a pressure chamber. See, that was actually, it wasn't bad because we didn't have. XC-35 was the first one. I forget when the hell they built that. Probably before World War II. That was the only pressurized airplane that I know of them the Air Corps ever had. But the Navy, they were interested, and they figured, you know, they pressurized, they push in a pressurized chamber. I didn't see that. I heard about that movie. But they put them in, but they couldn't pressurize, and then they made prototypes of it, and actually it was apparently flying the. I never did see it. And I'm ad-libbing because it was just what I told. But they took the Navy out of North Island Airport right before the Navy made a film, and they contracted to Holland. They did pretty well in the early stuff there. That was, well, not pressure breathing, but they fed all the guy ran out of oxygen and crashed on all of this stuff, and it made people listen.
Now, most people today don't even know what an iron lung machine is. Why did they have
an iron lung machine? basically what happened in the days of polio. We did not have a respirator. The anesthesiologist had a bag. Now, over in England, they had ventilators, they called them, I guess, at the time, that would do this and put a tidal volume in under certain pressure, but they were very, very crude, and they were very scarce. You didn't have them. Now, the iron lung, we called a tank. You actually put the whole patient in other words, it surrounded you, and you had a collar right here around your neck. In fact, we have one down at the museum if you want to see it. A collar around the neck. And what would happen, we have a bellows on the other end, and it had to 20 times a minute that bellows would go back, so it'd give you 20 breaths a minute and 500 cc's, which is half a liter every stroke. And your neck being out, they drop the pressure around your body and your lung would expand out, and then they'd have a positive pressure, you see, that would take and force it out. So consequently, that was called the iron lung. And a fellow named Jack Emerson with Emerson made those. He was in Boston, Cambridge. And there was a professor, Drinker, his name was, at Harvard University, and he had all the politics behind him, and there was kind of an argument who had which, and they were both made there. But Jack Emerson was the best. And one of the problems that they had with the iron lung, you put a patient in and it has 500 cc's every time. Well, normally, I can do that and take a pretty deep breath, maybe 175 cc's. But what would happen is they would go down to 500 cc's. And if they got airway secretion zone, you know, you sigh every once in a while. Well, Jack developed a sigh 3 times the normal time. And boy, this took care of patients that would normally go on to die of obstruction and so on. He did a lot. So that was the iron lung. And I have an Emerson lung down here if you want to look at it later.
I saw in your museum, you had a picture, there was like rooms, tons of people in these machines.
Yes, in other words, I can remember at Bellevue when I first, they had 24 or 25, and they had the gray ladies that operated. These were older nurses, and of course in their hygiene was terrible. Remember when you opened these, everything, the hygiene and so on, it didn't smell the best in there. But they'd have 3 gray ladies, and boy, they'd do this because they couldn't breathe, remember, when they opened those up. So they took care of the hygiene was always a problem, of course feeding and so on and all this, but they did a tremendous job. And I figured, you know, we would have these gray ladies to run our respirators and so on, but boy, they disappeared right after the polio was terminated, and they disappeared. Some of them became nurse anesthetists, but most of them just plain retired. But see, in the early days of polio, what would happen is, if you didn't get them in there, and you taught them how, there was a place down in California that taught them to frog breathe and do all kinds of things to try to get them out of there. But it was tough, it was really tough. Now toward the end, I think 54, if I remember, was the last polio epidemic. This was bulbar polio. And what would happen is, they'd become paralyzed, and maybe 2 weeks or so it would reverse. It's like Landre's and so on, another thing we had. But as long as you got them early and you ventilated them, they did very, very well. And I can remember I got onto this fairly early. And this, I forget the year, probably was 53 or 54. And I got a PBY, we call them OA10s. And I got a PBY, and I had my prototype respirators then I was playing with. I had 4 respirators we'd set up in there and so on. And I flew up to Vancouver airport up there. Of course, then I don't know what the hell they called it. But anyhow, we went in there and operated out of there. And what we did, we flew out to the lake country and so on. And the mothers we picked up were probably under 25, 20, 25, and the kids were maybe with polio. Another, they were really, and if you didn't get them out, they'd die and so on. They had us land, we'd make water landings or whatever we had to, and we got them in. But the big thing is, I only had 4 ventilators, but we had high school kids that were from the Vancouver High School, that anesthesiologists. And there was a fellow named Taylor, I think out of central Canada somewhere, that taught all of this, and he set it up. And the RCAF had this pretty well organized. But anyhow, they would take anesthesia circuits and they would ventilate these. They had a pump they would step on and so on, and they did 2 hours on and 2 hours off. And boy, it was tiresome. I know, I tried it. But I had 4 in, and I think we got up to 7. We'd stack on the back and so on. Then we'd take him into what was Sea Island Airport in those days, because Vancouver General, I guess, today. And the adults would go into Vancouver General, and then the kids would go into the Vancouver Children's Hospital. And they had kids in there because they didn't have enough Drinker Emerson lungs. They had kids in there doing the same thing, and I don't think they ever got credit. I mean, it was fantastic. So that was my experience, and that really got me interested in medevac. That was what really got me interested in medevac.
Now, you you pretty much worked with these machines in the military and saw for aviation purposes. What made you think that you could be used for medical purposes?
What Dr. Cornand was the one, he had followed me, and I'd not seen him for a while. And in Los Angeles, we had a college of chest physician. I saw where he was, and I invited him to Palm Springs to visit with me. And he was pretty familiar, and he went over, and he says, why the hell don't you take and make you've got all this, you got the know-how, and your magnets especially, why don't you make a breathing machine? In other words, that'll do. And so he was the one that implanted the idea in me. And probably, well, you know, it took 7 prototypes. It took 4 or 5 years to get that all together.
What year was that about?
Oh boy, let's see, probably 1950, I started, let's say in 57, I had it in production, and put 5 years, take 5 years off of that, yeah.
Now when I was a kid, I used to watch Dr. Kildare.
Yeah, you watch Get the Bird.
Yeah.
I don't know how, I think UCLA Medical School, I think a lot of this was, the movies, we know more about it, was shot there. And somehow, of course, they had all bird respirators and so on, UCLA. And I think the equipment, they used whatever equipment they had. And I think that's how it got, and they formulated all that. We got a lot of good publicity on that. And of course, a lot of docs got a kick out of it, too.
Now, you were doing this stuff under the military umbrella, but you were able to put your name on it like that.
I had an arrangement. In other words, anything that I developed was AN belonged to the military. And I had exemptions on medical, and to certain points. And I had that in writing from a provost marshal, so it wasn't AN. Otherwise, it would have been AN. But you see, the catch was, I had to develop that prototype off base. I could not make the prototype. I had to have a functioning unit, which was typical for a military, and the military had to want it. Well, of course they did. So consequently, I would develop and take my prototypes down there and run prototypes till I got it all worked out. I was the first, my lungs were first on anything I ever built, always. But down there they ran formal animal studies and so on, and patients said they take the worst patients. Of course, I didn't have sick lungs. So we had all of that developed before I went out in the civilian hospitals, which was a tremendous advantage.
Now, for a lot of inventions, there's like a moment, a turning point moment, where the concept alters on the aha moment. Was there a moment where all of a sudden you saw, wow, this could be put together to...
Not really. I think I had an orderly approach to it. But remember, I already had my diaphragm that was the right size, and I also had my magnets. So it was integrating the two together. It took me 7 prototypes to do it.